The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar today, how to make your data fit for GDPR. I'm just going to show my screen just to make sure that we're going there. And that doesn't seem to be showing. Just 1 second. Just make sure I am the presenter. Give me 1 moment. Okay. Okay, sorry about that small interlude while we got set up there. So welcome to our webinar, obviously on how to make your data fit for GDPR. This is not going to be a deep dive into the GDPR details, going to be very much a high level approach to dealing with the challenge of GDPR that I know we're all facing. So I'm joined today by Ken O'Connor. I'm delighted to have Ken with us on this event. Ken is a 20-year veteran of data governance and master data management, and is an evangelist for business value. My name's Martin Doyle, and I'm delighted to be here as well, just to introduce the subject. And we're here to start with the why. So you can start with all the good reasons for doing this, the pain side of things, the compliance, the 20 million euro fine, the 4% of global turnover cost that could be applied, which is very much the stick. Or you can look at it from the gain side of doing the right things by those data subjects, those people that you're working with on the projects. And really, if all you're looking for is compliance, then frankly, that's all you will achieve, compliance, whereas there is so much to gain. Now, there's a gentleman called Simon Sinek that some of you may be familiar with, who has the concept of starting with why. Now, that is all about the emotional side of things, and actually it's a deep subject. You can find Simon on YouTube. It's a fascinating video with millions and millions of watches, and it's all about the bypassing of the logical thought and getting to the emotional behaviors that come from our old brains, and it bypasses the neocortex, the new brain. And for me, that's why GDPR is about keeping our prospects and customers happy. So the emotion that we're trying to give them is happiness or trust. So they need to trust us that we're going to use their data wisely, we're going to use their data correctly. And now there is that framework that's being put in place, i.e. GDPR. Now, if we abuse them, then we'll of course pay a price. At best, they will not buy from you, I guess. At worst, we'll have a hefty fine from the Information Commissioner. So your data subjects, what do they want? Well, in my opinion, they just want to be kept happy. They want the trust that we are going to look after their data correctly. And again, another very interesting book that I've come across recently from a gentleman called Mo Gaudat. It's a book called Solve for Happy, where he came up with a happiness equation, which, as you can see on screen, basically if the events of life are greater than or equal to your expectations, you're happy. And if your expectations are not met, then you're unhappy. So for me, it's as simple as these data subjects expect us to look after their data. They require us to look after their data. And if we don't, they're going to be unhappy. So it really boils down to as simple as that. So the agenda for today, Ken's going to take us through some key points. We've just covered the start with the why. Ken is then going to show us about seeing what we don't see. Then we're going to talk about some nudge principles, the tipping point, and then the data value map. Then I'll come back and talk about knowing your data subject, unraveling the mess, and creating that single subject view. So I'll hand over to Ken at this point. So over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Pleasure to take part in this webinar today. We're going to be talking about, is your data fit for GDPR? And I'll be looking at your data supply chain. So in terms of, so I'm going to cover how to extract business value from your GDPR preparations, and specifically 3 parts: mapping your personal data supply chain, identifying pain points within it, and reducing costs by solving those pain points. So first of all, I would like to take a moment, actually less than 2 minutes, to just watch this brief video, pay close attention to it.
So if you could count how many times the player's wearing white passed the ball. So the correct answer is, of course, 16. But did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Here comes the gorilla, and there went a player. And did you see that the curtain is changing from red to gold? When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss an unexpected event. And that's the monkey business illusion. So Ken, there you're back.
Thanks for that, Martin. I am indeed. I am indeed. So in terms of nudge principles and, from behavioral science, what we learned from that monkey business illusion is that we're human. We tend to only see what we're looking for. So we were directed to do some counting. If we don't know what to look for, well, we're just not going to see it. But once we know what to look for, we see it everywhere. So if you're to watch that video again, of course, you'll spot the gorilla and you'll see the curtain changing color. I have to admit, when I first saw it, I missed the gorilla, and I certainly didn't see the curtain changing colors. So in terms of moving on, what about GDPR? What's the hidden gorilla or the elephant in the room? Well, it's the personal data supply chain between connecting the data subject and data users. So recently, Doug Laney, who's with Gartner and the author of Infonomics, put a post on LinkedIn with 100 days to go. He's basically saying many organizations don't even have an inventory of their data, let alone control of their personal data supply chain. But it's not just about GDPR. Research in terms of going back to Catry and Brown, 2010, organizations just don't know what data they have, how critical it is, how redundant it is, and like. So this is the hidden gorilla that affects so many projects. So many projects. Now, I've worked on data supply chain projects for the last 20-odd years, and they're all about getting data in accordance with what the regulator wants. GDPR is just another one, but it does have a twist. GDPR marks a tipping point. This is the first time ever, by law, organizations are required to be able to demonstrate that they understand their personal data supply chain, how they exercise control over it. And that includes, what personal data they process, how they acquire it, who can see it, who they share it with, does it go to third countries, all the who, whats, whys, wheres, and whens, right? You have to be able to deliver those. Well, thankfully, and I wish I'd had it for the last 20 years, there's now a simple, paper-based, tech-free way It's a silo buster to better understand your data supply chain. It's called the data value map. It's actually developed based on years of practical and academic research from the Cork University Business School. It's what they call a discursive template about building shared understandings around data initiatives. It can be applied to any data initiative, and it closes the gap between the data creator and the data user. And it's based on the 6 W's, the 6 honest men from I think it was Rudyard Kipling poem. And it starts with always focuses on business value first. There's no such thing as a data initiative. There are only business initiatives. There has to be a stakeholder, there has to be funding, there has to be executive support. It then looks at the actual, what they call now the information supply chain. How is data acquired, integrated, analyzed, delivered, who's doing what, applying the 6 questions to each of those sections in turn to link the creator to the user. And then, of course, all of that is supported by data governance, ensuring that data is fit for purpose and agreeing behaviors that will support that. So that's fine, but where do you start? Okay, well, you take a room and you get the people together, and these are the business people. These are the heads of business functions, the head of marketing, the head of HR, and their business subject matter experts. You take a copy of the data value map. You take a lot of Post-its, and you have to have a facilitator who's going to ask the data value map questions. So what then happens is you're prompting them, you kick off the conversation, and the data stakeholders, you pose the questions, and the data stakeholders then develop between them an understanding of the data initiative, the value it delivers, and the pain points. Now they also then agree, hey guys, this data stuff is very important. We need to agree some principles and some actions to ensure that we keep it fit for purpose. So like I say, it can be applied to anything, any data initiative, but what about when we apply it to GDPR? As soon as I saw it, I could see this is perfect. So here are some sample questions and answers. So you take the data value map, and you start with, so what's the business value? Well, it's in the risk mitigation space, and you're managing the risk of GDPR breach. And then in terms of what personal data do we process? Well, you got a list of options there. How do we acquire it? Well, it could be a bank, and we've got various forms, mobile, desktop, paper. Someone could come into the branch. So where do we integrate it? Well, maybe we pull all the data together. And bear in mind, it's the business people who are answering, the business people with their IT support who are answering these questions, right? They're pulling it together in a customer database. Well, we're going to analyze it. Why? Well, we want to do some cross sales. We want to develop some sales leads. And who's going to use that? Well, the sales team, of course. Why? Because, well, they want to send an email, direct marketing, out to a prospect who happens to be a data subject. Okay, that's fine. So about GDPR specific question, what's the legal basis for sending that email to the prospect? Maybe the business people say, well, we're depending on consent. Well, that goes all the way back then to, well, how do we acquire consent? How do we acquire it across all of those different places, the different forms, paper forms, phone, branch? How do we then, make sure? This leads then into a data governance, data behavior sort of question. Well, we better make sure we verify consent at data acquisition, and we better make sure that we keep and manage the quality of that consent as it flows through the data supply chain. So that's a real whistle-stop tour at a very high level of how you can apply the data value map in GDPR. So if there's one thing, if you only remember one thing from what I'm telling you here, or what I'm sharing with you, is that you're going to have to prepare for GDPR. It's happening very soon. Now, out of your preparations, you have the opportunity to get a better data supply. That will deliver better results, better sales, and that will deliver, as Martin said earlier, happy people. That's what it's about. You, me, as data subjects, but your data protection officer, if you have one, the ICO, your CEO, your shareholders, and critically, the people that you interact with, your customers, prospects, employees, and suppliers.
Thanks, Ken. That's great, and really shows the value of the data value map in extracting the importance and getting everybody on the same page from the business, the IT, the whole team. So The next part I will be presenting, so kicking off really with why bother. So across the top of that data value map, what are we trying to achieve? What's the business goals here? Well, we really want our subjects to be trusting of us and therefore happy that we're able to communicate with them. Obviously, profitability is a business goal. Business agility comes from this. We make better decisions when we have better data and have a better business. And clearly, visibility of our customers, suspects, prospects, suppliers, etc., is wider. And of course, we've got the decreasing elements here. So the compliance, of course, we don't want to be fined. We hate waste. That's just useless. Reworking, scrap and rework is not good. And just the friction in the business of handoffs from one department to another. So I think there's a bit of a data quality delusion really around this, and we're going to dive deeper into a bit of the data quality aspects. So the delusion really is that everybody, unless they've applied the data value map, of course, understands the importance of data quality. I think everybody knows that it should be done, but we have this situation, well, whilst everybody agrees it's important, we think that everybody cares about it, and we think that everybody knows what actions they should take to improve it. But really, without that data value map and getting everybody on the same page, getting the responsibility, accountabilities, etc., it's very difficult to do so. So I'm not going to read out these data protection regulation. It's all over the internet. It's on every presentation that you guys have seen, I'm sure. But we do know that there are important aspects that we need to look after. What it has done, though, is the whole GDPR initiative has elevated us from the basement to the boardroom, and we now have the executive teams focused because of the penalties involved, of course. And these tenets, again, I won't read them out, but there are specific and important items here that I've highlighted in red. And bottom left quadrant there, the accurate and where necessary kept up to date. So that's all we're going to focus upon in the next couple of slides. So again, a bit of a repeat of the previous slide, but it's the right to be forgotten is critical here. The consent aspect and the accurate where necessary and must be kept up to date. These are very important aspects, and it's all about that data quality supply chain. So we start off with this ball of grief, as I describe it, where we have all sorts of data coming from everywhere. It's complete or incomplete, it's inconsistent, we don't know where the sources are, we've got duplicate data, etc., etc. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to start using those questions, the 6 wise men that Ken referred to, the who, what, why, where, when. Focus on our why. Why are we doing this? Because we want our data subjects to trust us and for them to trust that we will not abuse their data. So it's who can use it, what times can it be used, where can it be used, when can it be used, how may it be used, how do we know we've got consent? And so we need to unravel this ball of string, and typically it's a process. As Ken said, there are inputs and there are outputs, and if we break it down, we can make it quite simple. So when we have broken those processes down, we know that we've got a source, we know that we've got a target. I'm using 365 here. It could be Salesforce, could be any of 80 plus systems that we are able to connect to. And we need to take that data and do things to it, to polish it. We need to format, validate, parse, verify, authenticate, enhance, suppress, ensure that we've got their consent. And along the way, make decisions. Those decisions are informed by the business community, those things that we discovered during the data value mapping process. That allows us to get our single record view, as I call it, in this case, a single subject view, and our master record view or master record management, which is our master subject view. And to do that, we've got some technologies. We have an integration, migration, and rules engine platform called AppRules. And in the context of CRM, as we have it on our screen here, we have an integration called Perfecta Merge that identifies, manages duplicates within CRM and makes sure you have a golden record. So let's talk about the golden record. We need to pull data together from multiple rows of a single database, perhaps, where we might have duplication, and create a single golden record, or we could be pulling data from multiple disparate systems to create our golden record. After all, if we have a subject access request, we really don't want multiple records in our databases where we really don't know whether they have approved and agreed and consented, whether we really know about that customer, and therefore we can work with them in a sensible and consolidated way. So how do we create the golden record? Well, obviously, we identify duplicates that might be non-identical, Mike, Michael, and Mick, Smith, and Smythe in this instance. And we need to recognize that we've got these 3 records in this scenario. And the one in the middle we would treat as our golden record, the one we're going to keep. And we're going to take data off of those duplicate records, give it to the surviving record, make that our golden record. And then that process means that we keep that master record and we deactivate those secondary records. They're not necessarily deleted, they're now linked to that master record so that we know the lineage and the history, and we're able to manage the consent attributes that might have been on those duplicates. And one might have said, yes, you can, I do consent. Another one says, I do not consent. But we need to define rules around what we retain, how we retain it, where we retain it, etc., etc. So the steps for that mastering, just a quick repeat on here, finding those duplicates, perfecting them, and then merging them. So the story gets a bit wider now. We're now looking at multiple databases where the data subjects that could have been in our 3 databases on the left, the same Mike Smith, Michael Smith, and Michael Smythe, in their data sets, one we believed had passed away, one we believed had actually moved, i.e. had gone away, and the other 2 we had said was no way. They did not want to be marketed to, or they did not give our consent to various activities. So when we consolidate that in our golden record, we have been able to go out to the outside world using our DQ on demand service. We can go out and see whether they should be suppressed from a consent point of view, suppressed from a gone away or deceased point of view, and also check for their consent, as we have a consent platform which allows us to be fully GDPR compliant. Every time you need to send a communication to somebody, you can check against our consent platform. The outcome of that, as you can see on the right-hand side, is that although those records might be in 3 different systems, they're now all unified. They're now all Michael Smith. We know that he has not passed away in this instance. However, he has gone away, but we've recovered his new address. And unfortunately, he said he's not prepared for us to communicate with him. So just expanding that slightly on the next slide, this is where we can go out to our DQ on demand services, use our technologies to go out and look for suppressions and validations and authentications, enhancements, etc., so that we can comply with that requirement to keep our data accurate and up to date. So really, quality is certainly not an act, it is a habit, according to Aristotle. I won't read these verbatim, but basically, starting off with the data value map, we can look at avoiding data errors before they've even started. We can understand the process, the workflow, the work streams, where the data goes, whether we can reduce the unnecessary work that's being done and reduce handoffs, because I've never seen a problem with a relay race with the runner dropping the baton during his 4x4 100 or 4x100 relay race, but I've certainly seen it at the interfaces being dropped often. And those interfaces in our businesses are system A to system B, or human, or paper, or retyping, rekeying, whatever that might be, or just the anomalies of one data system talking to another data system. And from the 1-10-100 principle, we know that if it costs £1 at point of data entry, it takes £10 to correct it at some later date down the system, and it could cost you 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 times more now under the GDPR fine scenario than just fixing it and getting it right first time. So we're always seeking to reduce flow, prevent that double handling, reduce the number of interfaces that cause us to drop the baton. We should never pass a known defect downstream. We're only going to, talking of happiness, we're only going to upset the consumer that's down the line in that workflow stream, and ultimately, in this case, our data subject who we're trying to keep happy. That's our purpose, that's our why. And we shouldn't take shortcuts. We shouldn't allow a local optimization to cause a global degradation. We all know that with old integration projects where old legacy code might be built in, we don't understand the rules, people are afraid to touch it, and therefore a local optimization might be an Excel worksheet or something to fix a problem, but down the line, you'll always pay a price. And we really want to achieve a profound understanding of the data ecosystem, and that really comes from understanding from the start. And that quality control should no longer be about expertise, but should be common knowledge for everyone, because everybody is responsible. So some steps as we draw to a close to consider for your GDPR. First of all, identify there's a problem. Now, I know you're on this call, so you know that GDPR is a challenge. I don't think we should look at it as a problem. We should look at it as an opportunity to make our data subjects happy. So what do? We gather the evidence of who, what, why, where, when, as Ken described in the data value mapping process. That allows us to quantify where we are, what we've got to do, what the obstacles are, and how we're going to overcome them. And then by accepting the scale of the challenge and defining the goals, and then measuring against those goals, we can then perform the tasks that are linked and associated and presented to the team to perform. So in our master subject management exercise, I thought this little story might be relevant to get us to think. So in our master subject management stories, about 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. And there was an important job to be done. Everybody was asked to do it. Everybody was sure somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. And unfortunately, under GDPR, the consequences can be quite steep. And in this final slide, I think we should build and design quality in. It doesn't matter whether it's data quality, it's business quality, sort your garage, sort the attic. It's the same principle. We should sort out the unneeded and unwanted data because we should be storing relevant data. We should set it in order so that we know where we are. We should be polishing it. We should be standardizing it and then putting in principles to sustain it. And then we'll achieve the GDPR goals that we're looking for. So thanks for taking the time today. If you are on this maturity curve and you recognize yourself as being in the sort or set in order area, then the data value map, I think, is for you. If that's the case, please feel free to contact us, and Ken will be delighted to work with you in a workshop environment, and we can work with you to help you achieve your GDPR and data management goals. If we're further down the line, or as an outcome of that activity, we're looking at shining, standardizing, and sustaining, then of course we as DQ Global have tools and technologies and experience and expertise to help you with that. So I hope that's been a good session for you. Thank you for your time. It looks like we're actually finishing on time. And if there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the question panel. Although I am conscious that we have taken up your 30 minutes. So it looks like no questions at the moment. So on that basis, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank Ken for joining us today. Thank you very much, Ken. And we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you, everybody, and best of luck with GDPR.